politics is downstream from culture. But the church should be above culture, driving politics.
Right.
And yet we somehow think that we're supposed to abdicate our faith, engaging in the public square.
In 3, 2, 1, action.
Welcome to Equipping the Saints with Cheon, and I'm with my dear friend, Pastor Rob McCoy. And I want to just say that he is a hero to me and to so many in America. He was mayor of Thousand Oaks, and he's been a pastor of Calvary Chapel of Thousand Oaks. But so good to have you here because you are a revivalist and a reformer. And thank you for taking time out of your busy schedule.
Well, normally I'd call you Che when we're together,
Yes,
but
yeah.
I want everyone to know you're Pastor Che to me. I've been so blessed by your leadership. So whatever you're saying about me, I'm rubber, you're glue, bounces off me, sticks to you.
Well, thank you for the compliment. But seriously, what you have done, modeling what it means to be a servant leader, because you were mayor at a time that a major tragedy took place in Thousand. Why don't you share that and how the Lord allowed this to be used to advance the kingdom, souls got saved, and you were able to bring transformation to your city?
So I was mayor pro tem in 2018, and on November 8th, a gunman went into a country western dance hall called the Borderline, and he shot 12 of our young people. 2 of them were from our congregation. A friend of mine, Officer Helis, was killed. That was by stray bullets of a CHP officer, but nevertheless, he went in to stop the gunman who ultimately took his own life. And shortly after that event, we were gathered around the command center, and it was late at night, and we had given an 800 number for parents to call to see if their child was in any one of the area hospitals. But a number of them were still gathered, and they couldn't find their children. And so we set up a command center at the Alex Fiore Teen Center, and I went and stayed with those families through the night. I'd been a sheriff's chaplain with Ventura County Sheriff's Department, and I was with every family as they were notified their child was one of the victims. So through the night, you just tell them, pray for the best and prepare for the worst. And they did, but you can't prepare for that. And then the next day, our entire city was encircled by fires. We have an open space ring, and I think it was called the Silver Springs Fire. And it was apocalyptic, to say the least. Wow. And it was during that time that the city came together. It was the most seminal event in the 50-year history of the city. And then shortly thereafter, in less than a month, I became mayor of the city.
And so what was some of the first actions you took just to bring healing to the city and comfort the people that had lost loved ones?
The year to the date that the anniversary came of the shooting, we had a park and dedicated. It's stunningly beautiful. And it's a place where people gather, and it's very contemplative. And the city came together, and we also helped with the families' burials and attending the funerals. And it was a traumatic time. I mean, we had to evacuate senior citizens during the fires and going and visiting the evacuation centers. And as difficult of a time as it was, it brought the city together in a way I'd never seen. And, elections are divisive.
Yeah.
And I had run for re-election against my opponent. And the night that we did a prayer vigil right after the shooting, we saw each other. And I won't, for the sake of their privacy, I won't say what they said, but it was heart-wrenching in a very special way. And they gave me a hug. And right there, the political differences dissipated because we were all there for the same desire to find healing and minister to the community. And it was a profound time.
Well, what people don't realize is that when government is a good government, people rejoice. When the righteous are in office, people rejoice, and it does so much good. And we're so impacted and affected by government. And yet we have this mentality in the church that we shouldn't be involved. And yet you got involved, running for city council, becoming mayor. What led you, and what was the biblical foundation in your life to give you that certainty I'm doing something that's going to be good, is going to be advancing God's kingdom. I'm going to let my good works shine before men, that they will give glory to God the Father.
Prior to being ordained as a Calvary Chapel pastor, and even before becoming a Christian, I wasn't raised in a Christian home. And they were God-fearing and honest parents. And they were very community-oriented. My mother was president of Republican Women. My dad was president of Rotary, president of the Chamber of Commerce. My dad had 3 tours of Vietnam. He was a retired Navy captain, vice president of a bank. And he ran for city council on 2 occasions. And my mother, I'd walk precincts with her, and we were always engaged in the local politics, the county politics, state and national. And that's what I grew up with. It was a responsibility as a citizen, and I learned that from my parents. So when I became a Christian, I was taken aback by the lack of engagement from Christians. And it wasn't shocking when I heard the statistic later in my time as senior pastor that there's estimated 60 to 85 million evangelical Christians in America. It's the largest minority in America, and yet only half of them are registered to vote. And of the half that are registered to vote, only half of those vote in a presidential election, about 11 to 12% in a non-presidential election. Wow. And I couldn't comprehend that because what my parents were doing is they were serving their community. And when I read the 2 great commandments that Jesus responded, he said, love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, strength, and mind. Love your neighbors yourself. On these 2 commandments hang all the law of the prophets. Why would you not contend in a constitutional republic with those who are making decisions for your neighbors, or whether they would live quiet and peaceable lives in all godliness and reverence, as it says in Timothy? And it was just baffling to me. So I've never changed anything in my time in the ministry. I've always brought candidates forward to have them speak. I've endorsed candidates. We've talked about the issues. It's always been part of, the scriptures speak of all these things. Pastors think that peace is the absence of conflict, but it's not the absence of conflict. It's the presence of Christ in the midst of the conflict. He said, I didn't come to bring peace, but a sword. And the gospel is divisive.
Yes.
But we're trying to avoid conflict. But in reality, people want us to contend for their future.
Right.
And they respect that. So if we're going to love our neighbor, we need to be in the ecclesia, as it says in Matthew 16:18. Upon this rock I will build my... It's not church. The word is ecclesia. Yeah. And Aristotle defined it as, assembly or public square or city hall. It's where the citizens of the Greek city-state would gather to decide the welfare of their citizens.
He said that about the ecclesia or ecclesia. Why don't you share how, as you were involved in doing all these things, what are some of the criticism you got from the religious community or the church, saying that you're being too political?
So in the Sermon on the Mount, when Jesus says, rejoice and be exceedingly glad when they persecute you and say all kinds of vile things, I never experienced any of that for the most part when I was a pastor in the pulpit. But when I ran for office, it's as though the gates of hell itself were unleashed. Death threats, and my car was keyed, windows were broken, and the horrible letters that you'd receive and the vitriol. And yet I came to realize if you read that, you would start to be embittered to the opposition, and the Lord wouldn't let me.
Yeah.
And he gave me this statement that I just continue to reiterate, that people aren't the enemy, they're the opportunity. Their ideology is the enemy, and we're contending for truth. And why wouldn't you do that in the public square? It was Tyndale, our first English-speaking Bible, translated the word correctly into assembly. And for that one word, the king had him hung and his remains burned.
Oh my.
Satan doesn't want us to contend for the things he has a lock on, because civil law, apart from moral law, enslaves man. But moral law, driving civil law, are the wise restraints that make men free. The law doesn't save, but Galatians 3 says it's a school teacher, guardian to point us to Christ until faith comes.
Why don't you expound on moral law? When you talk about moral law, what does that look like?
The Decalogue, the 10 Commandments. The one God, no idols, don't take the name of the Lord your God in vain, honor the Sabbath day, honor your mother and father, don't murder, don't commit adultery, don't steal, don't bear false witness, and don't covet.
Yeah. Well, you're basically quoting Matthew 22, 37, 39. You quoted to love God and to love one another. Right. And that just sums up all the law and the prophets that you mentioned.
On these 2 things. All the law
and so we're talking about really loving people, loving the community out of our love for Jesus, that we're engaged in serving in this public arena, especially in a country like the United States, where we have this democratic republic. It's not like we're living in communist China or North Korea. We have the freedom to, and thank God for that privilege, because I believe that's a gift from God. And so what can you do to share with even just people watching this or just citizens how they can serve their community by being involved in the government mountain?
The first thing I would encourage them is to realize that, pastors and congregations have been indoctrinated to believe that politics is dirty. Now, it is a blood sport, and you say politics is dirty. Well, so's the church in some respects, but we don't abandon the bride.
Yeah.
Nor do you give up on the nation that he's entrusted, because God says that he'll make disciples of all nations.
Right.
So for us to be good citizens in a constitutional republic that's designed unlike anything else in the 6,000 years of recorded history, that protects in the first 16 words of the Bill of Rights, Congress shall make no law respecting the establishment of religion, nor of prohibiting the free exercise thereof. They understood that if the nation was giving the sovereignty in the first three words of the preamble, we the people of the United States, and the power is on loan and they're constrained by the 7 articles of the Constitution, they will usurp that power and that authority, and they will stifle your ability to pursue the Lord and shut down the First Amendment if you don't participate and hold them accountable.
Amen.
Our birth certificate says, for this reason, governments were instituted among men for the preservation of those inalienable rights.
Right.
It's our right and our duty that we have to contend for that. So for the sake of our neighbor, we contend in the public square. Jesus said, to have one of these little ones stumble, it'd be better for you to have a millstone tied around your neck, cast in the deepest ocean. So you're watching our children, 15 years and younger, being given hormone blockers that are considered inhumane for serial rapists in prison. And their bodies can be mutilated without their parents' permission. And if a parent contends, there'll be a ward of the state. That's contrary to what the scriptures say.
Right.
We're to contend for the welfare of our citizenry. That's our responsibility. Why wouldn't you attend a school board meeting?
Absolutely, yeah.
When they're going to take from your citizenry or they're going to attack somebody and it's an unjust law outside the articles of the Constitution, because we're to be good citizens. Paul invoked Roman citizenship rights in his, and we should know the same in the Constitution, or the constitutional republic we live in. I would close with this. To be a good citizen and a Christian, it doesn't mean that this idea of an ad hominem attack of a Christian nationalist, which all they're simply saying is you can't love two things at one time or you're an idol worshiper. Look, I love Jesus with all my heart, soul, strength, and mind. And I also love my wife. Does that make me an idol worshiper of Michelle? You can love God and love your nation.
Yes.
Because in the 6,000 years of recorded history, almost 250 years, there's been more patents, Nobel Peace Prize winners, more symphonies. If you ride in an elevator, invented by an American. If you fly in an airplane, invented by an American. All these things because we've had freedom.
Right.
And so we need to protect that.
Absolutely.
And liberty's not man's idea, it's God's idea.
Yeah.
2 Corinthians 3:17, I think.
Yeah, where the
Spirit of the Lord is, there's liberty.
Absolutely. Well, one of the things I think people have withdrawn from government politics, because instead of having the Christ-like spirit, because, there are things that we totally disagree with and we consider evil, like abortion, but we come across as being hateful instead of just sharing the view from a biblical perspective, and to be, as the Bible says, speak the truth in love.
Yeah.
And so how could you coach people to say this could be disagreement, we have our conviction, but don't be so antagonistic towards people that differ from you? How do we walk that fine balance and demonstrate conviction, no compromise, and yet walk in love?
Pastor Che, that is a tremendous question. A servant speaks when he's spoken to, he offers his opinion when he's asked. And I'll give you a perfect illustration of how the Lord used this in my own life. My wife and I, when we began the senior pastorate at Calvary Chapel, Thousand Oaks, we were so poor we couldn't pay attention. And we hadn't had a vacation. I've been an assistant pastor working up in San Jose, and now I'm a senior pastor. I can set some vacation time. So I took my kids and my wife up to the border at Oregon and California, up at Crescent City, to Jedediah Smith Campground. I had an old Suburban with almost 200,000 miles on it. We rented a tent trailer. We get up there, the brakes start giving out on my Suburban. I go to church that Sunday, and we don't have money to fix this thing. I get to church on Sunday up there. It's a Calvary chapel, and the guy hears a brace, goes, "Man, you got issues." I said, "I know." I said, "You know a good mechanic?" He goes, "I'm one." He said, "Bring it in, I'll take care of it." I said, "You're kidding me?" He goes, No, I'll take care of it. Came to find out later I was a pastor. It wasn't like a pastor's deal. And it was just a genuine, heartfelt desire to want to help. So I don't have a car to get back to the campsite. He lets me use his old truck. It's a beat up truck, but I go back campsite and he says, "Come back at, I think, 2:00 to pick it up." I come back and there's a Geo Metro up on the stand and my Suburban is behind it. And they're still up on the lift. And there's a woman sitting in the waiting room. I said, "You from the area?" She says, "I'm originally from Modesto. I was a teacher. But I left because of these right-wing suburban driving fundamentalists." I said, "Oh," and I could have immediately responded in frustration, but you don't react, you respond. And the best way to someone's heart is to ask them questions. They'll give you a roadmap to their heart. I said, "Well, why'd you move here?" And she said, "It's a funny story." I said, "I got time." She had opened up a map. I saw these Indian heads and there were reservations and I figured this is a spiritual place. So I moved here. I said, "How'd that work out?" She says, "They're a bunch of drunks. And it's been awful." And my daughter, and she's lamenting and asking me questions. "What would you do?" And I'm just sharing with her when she asked me and she's crying and she's touched and they tell her her car's ready and they're lowering her Geo Metro and my Suburban's beginning to appear. And she says, "You know, I've been doing all the talking and I have no idea who you are."
Right.
And I said, "Well, I'm a fundamentalist minister and that's my Suburban." And she laughed hysterically. And I had a chance to minister to her. The same thing in politics.
Yeah. Hi, I'm Cheon. I'm the president and founder of Harvest International Ministry. Harvest International Ministry, the acronym is actually HIM. It's all about Him. It's all about Jesus and His kingdom. It was started in 1996 with a vision of reaching the unreached peoples of the earth. Since then, revival has broken out, and now we're in 70 nations with thousands of churches as part of HIM. We didn't start all these churches. We have empowered leaders, national leaders in respective nations, and giving them the resources to start these churches, including finances. And I believe that God's going to fill the earth with His glory as the water covered the sea, as Habakkuk 2:14 prophesies. Will you partner with us in reaching nations? We're serious about fulfilling the Great Commission. And I promise you, every cent will be used to advance God's kingdom, including preaching the gospel of the kingdom with signs and wonders following on our television show. Now, for those who live in the United States, I want to send you a copy of my book, Modern Day Apostles. Check out the QR code, follow the directions, and we'll get this book out to you as soon as possible. For more information, go to harvestim.org.
When I was on the council, I was a freshman council member. The mayor at the time we were polar opposites politically. Mm-hmm. And she said to me, "I want you to come out to support our Muslim citizens who have been impacted by the president's immigration ruling." Now, I didn't believe that to be true, but she asked me, and I'm a man under authority, and she's the mayor.
Yeah.
So I attended. And when I got there, they had signs and everyone who didn't vote for me was there.
Yeah.
And I called my wife to tell her I miss you and I'm in trouble, but I just want you to know I love you.
Yeah.
And my heart's heavy. I'm scared. And I'm across the street and it's this mob over there. And it's a mosque. And I just said, "Lord, would you send me a friend?" And a man in a Muslim attire introduces himself. He says, "I'm Samir." I said, "So, Samir, I asked God to bring me a friend and here you are." He says, "I'm glad you came out. Let me introduce you to the imams." We cross the street and it's like Moses parting the Red Sea. And everyone's like, "Why is he here?" And I get there, I meet the imams, and then he wants me to meet his wife. Mm-hmm. Then the mayor comes up to me. And there had been in the front page of the paper that day, John Cummings, who is the head of the Indivisible Conejo, a Soros-funded organization, was targeting Rob McCoy. We're monitoring him. And they, and here it is, this guy's after me. I'd never met him, I don't know him. And the mayor says, "Rob, I want you to meet someone. This is John Cummings." And John looks at me and he's just angry. I said, "John, I came so it'd be easier to monitor me." And everyone laughed but him, and I gave him a hug and he didn't hug back. And Samir says, "You're Rob McCoy." I said, "Yes." He says, "Ooh." I said, "Are you upset?" You're not who I thought you were. I hope I'm not who you thought I was." He goes, "No." He says, "I'm sorry." And everyone began to speak, and they were left of me, and all the representatives, and every one of them couched their vitriol because I was there, except for John Cummings, and he sounded shrill. The mayor was touched. He said, "Why are you here? None of the other council members came." I said, "Because you asked me." She said, "I thought you'd be the last to be here." I said, "You're my friend." That's how you build a community.
That's awesome. I mean, you're doing what Christ would do. He taught us to bless those who curse you, pray for those who persecute you, do good to those who hate you. And this is in Sermon on the Mount, Matthew 5, I believe 40 or 44. But the Lord really rebuked me because when we sued Governor Newsom in 2020, I was just really ticked off at the lockdown. And I started to joke about Governor Newsom. I called him Governor Nuisance, and that he was a nuisance. And
I call him Governor Mussolini, and I'll explain why.
Okay, well, let me tell you what happened to me before you explain that.
Yeah, please.
Because you may change. Because someone wrote me a letter to me, and it was a very kind letter, and she said, I know what he's doing is wrong, evil, but he's still the governor, and I think you still have to honor the position of governor. And use the illustration of President Biden came into our auditorium. Would you not stand? I said, of course I would. I was thinking to myself, of course I would. And the Lord began to speak to me and said, you got to pray for him. You got to pray that he would have a Damascus Road encounter. Mm-hmm. Can you imagine if he got radically saved, what would happen? And 1 Timothy 2 says we're to pray for those who are in authority. So I started to pray for him. So this is my prayer. I've been praying, God, save him or remove him.
Yeah.
Daniel chapter 2 removes kings and places kings. And so that changed my paradigm. And I realized I have to be Christ-like, even with my enemies, with people that have a different policy, that were persecuting the church, because he was obviously discriminating against the church. We're not essential. We're marijuana dispensaries, abortion clinics are essential. And that really gave me a perspective that I'm in this, but I have to be very careful to be Christ-like in how I present myself and what I say. So thank you so much for modeling that and sharing that awesome story, because you have demonstrated that Christ-like character.
Can I tag on to the last thing real quick, Pastor Che? I call him Governor Mussolini the same way Jesus called the Pharisees and the Sadducees a brood of vipers.
Okay.
I call him Mussolini the same way Jesus said hypocrites.
Right.
In this sense, it's hyperbole.
Yeah.
Because when he is saying you're not allowed to sing, but like you pointed out,
right,
they need to see that his actions are tyrannical. Now, in his presence, which I've been, especially after the shooting, I thanked him. I sincerely was grateful for his efforts.
Good.
But in relation to what he's doing, I am contending with him.
Oh, no, I call him
arena,
out. We sued him.
Yeah.
We sued him. I mean, we're taking action, and we're calling out evil when it is evil. And of course, Jesus had righteous anger. He turned the money table, and we see that twice in the Gospels, that in the beginning of his ministry and at the end of his ministry. So that righteous anger is there. But I want to do it in a way that it's legitimate, but also not letting the sun go down on my anger, if you will.
That's good. I'm grateful for that. Now, in regards to TPUSA Faith with Charlie Kirk, Charlie and I met serendipitously. There's really no reason why the two of us would meet in a sea of humanity. And yet God brought our paths together. And Charlie had never spoken in a church before. He didn't think he was wanted. I said, that's the place you need to be the most. And when we first met, he said, I didn't know a guy like you existed. I go, what do you mean? He goes, a pastor in politics. I said, I didn't know a guy like you existed, a young conservative making waves in the country,
right,
and having effect. And the two of us found commonality, and he spoke in our church. And I think he's one of the best preachers in America, if not the best. I mean,
yes, he's brilliant.
He's phenomenal. And he studies to show himself approved, a workman need not be ashamed. He rightly divides the word of truth. And he's autodidactic. He didn't go to university. He's self-taught.
Really?
Yeah,
I didn't know that.
Oh, brilliant. It gives me stretch marks on my brain. And he'll use my lines, and then he goes, do you have any more? And I go, you've taken everything. He just drains you in the sense that one hearing of it, and he's memorized it. So when we came together, and I said, Charlie, you think you don't belong in the church. That's exactly where you belong, because the church has abdicated its responsibility in the public square. And you are that bridge, that guardian, that teacher to point people to Christ till faith comes, because he's never compromised on his faith. But he didn't think the church wanted anything to do with politics. Well, the church has to be involved.
Absolutely.
We're to drive that. Breitbart said politics is downstream from culture. But the church should be above culture, driving politics.
Right.
And yet we somehow think that we're supposed to abdicate our faith,
Yeah.
engaging in the public square.
No.
That doesn't work.
No, absolutely. No, Jesus is king over the whole earth, and including government as well as the church. How can we get involved with Team USA?
First of all, get your pastor involved. If you didn't want to get involved, start something on your own. We can do biblical citizenship classes for you, which we provide. We can do voter registration. We invite to pastors' conferences, which is our third, and they just keep exploding. You'll be a partner with us, which we have 3,100 partner churches across the country in such a short amount of time. It's remarkable. And pastors need to understand this. Your congregation is hungry for this.
Absolutely. The media just saturates us with what's going on in politics, and yet we're reticent in the pulpit when like 75% of our lives are being impacted by policies and the government, and we don't talk about it. We have to engage, but from a biblical perspective. And so what are your handles? How can they get a hold of you and be involved with TPUSA?
TPUSA.com, and then I'm godspeak.com or Rob_McCoy. .us if you want to do Instagram. You just Google Turning Point USA.
Yeah.
You'll come into it all. And
that's great.
Any way we can help you, we'd love to, and partner with your church.
No, we want to be partners, and we are. I mean,
we have been.
Yeah, we have been,
continue
and of course,
to be.
we continue to do that. And
I want to tell folks. I want to tell folks. When we contended against the governor and the counties, and you were in LA, I was in Ventura County. Mine was a little easier than yours, but there were very few that stood.
Yeah.
And my favorite definition of a friend, Pastor Che, is that when the whole world goes out, they come in. That was you for me. And I can't thank you enough. And all those who are part of your fellowship and all those who are affected by this broadcast, I want them to know what you mean to me and how much you've blessed me.
Well, you were leading the way for us. We saw you act first, and you were just giving us courage and encouragement to persevere through the lawsuit.
No, you had a lot more to lose. But
hey, thank you so much, Rob.
Bless you,
you got to be
Che.
back on again, okay?
All right.
All right, God bless. Thank you so much. Well, thank you so much for joining us on this episode of Equipping the Saints, and we'll see you next week. If you were touched by this show, I want you to pray this prayer with me. I want you to give your whole heart to Jesus Christ, even if you've done this before, because it could be a rededication or a first-time commitment. Just pray this prayer. Just say, Jesus, forgive me for my sins. I repent. I give you my whole life, 100%, all that I am and all that I have. And by your grace, I will love you. I will radically obey you, trust you no matter what. In Jesus' mighty name, amen. God bless you as you pray that prayer, as you made Jesus the Lord of your life. If you would like to see more content from Cheon Media, check out the website below.
If you're ever visiting the area, we'd love to see you at one of our 5 campuses. For more information, check out our website or any of our social media platforms.